Okay, I get to ask John some questions, and a few of them have given me some questions as we go. How are you?
I'm well, very well, thank you.
It's good to see you.
Yes, very good. I'm glad Ian's equipment wasn't on my golf ball yesterday because it wasn't going quite in the direction I wanted. Certainly not in the hole.
Do we start by asking him what his thingy is? I don't even know what that's it. Yeah. What's your handicap now?
5.8.
Ooh.
Ask me what I shot yesterday.
What did you shoot yesterday?
85. That's not what someone who's off 5.8 shoots.
Okay,
right.
That's not quite so impressive.
No, it was not flash.
Okay, 38th Prime Minister, 2008 to 2016. Prior to that, Merrill Lynch, head of global. I was supposed to do a proper introduction to him as he walked in. Head of global foreign exchange for Merrill Lynch for all those years. So let's go, and we're going to talk a bit about what you're doing now because people are genuinely interested in that. But I'm just going to start and hit in with the kind of personal, which is why you? I mean, did you think as that, I don't know, name an age, as that 7-year-old boy living in Christchurch, as that 13-year-old kid that was starting at high school, you know, the whole State House thing, the whole, you know, the kid that you are, the teenager that you were, you know, why you? I mean, because you've obviously got something that is innately special and incredibly driven and intelligent, and there's a lot of people like that don't make it.
Yeah, I mean, firstly, I always wanted to be Prime Minister. So when I was 10 or 11, you know, I used to wander around, you know, I mean, I wanted to be an All Black, but I pretty quickly worked out that was never happening. I wanted to be Prime Minister, and I was always interested in politics and was sort of interested in a little bit in debates. And my mother was a fascinating woman. So my mother was an Austrian Jewish refugee. So she was born in 1922, would have been 100 next year. When she was 16, she was living in Austria. And the Nazis invaded, obviously, and she had an aunt who lived in the UK. And back in those days, unlike it is in New Zealand, in New Zealand we have a thing called family reunification. So say you're South African and there's 3 kids in your family and 2 of them live in New Zealand, then the way the rules work is the third one will be able to come to New Zealand because the nucleus of the family is here, right? But back in those days, the way it worked was that if you wanted to go to another country, particularly the UK, and you wanted to sponsor someone, you had to be, and you were a woman, you had to be married. And so my mother had an aunt who lived there, and the aunt actually paid a British soldier to marry her.
Wow.
So it was like, you know, bachelorette or whatever, but no, you know, no cameras and a bit of money. And then she sponsored my mother and her brother to come. And her mother wouldn't come. And then the rest of the family went to the concentration camps, and none of them made it. So mum was the sort of woman who turned up 16 years of age in the UK, couldn't speak a word of English, had no family other than Lottie, the aunt, had come actually from a very well-to-do household, so was quite well educated for the times, thought she'd have this, you know, lovely life for the rest of her life, and ended up in this really unusual sort of, you know, situation. And the story sort of goes on a bit, but after she met Dad after the war, came out to New Zealand, and then when I was 6, Dad had this massive heart attack and dropped down dead. And so Mum went off to the accountant, and my sisters are 3 years and 10 years older than me, said, oh, I've got this problem, my husband's died, he's got all these businesses, I know nothing about them. And the accountant said, I'll come back in 2 weeks. So she went back, and she went back 2 weeks later. He said, do you want the good news or the bad news? And Mum said, better give me the bad news. And he said, you're broke. And Mum said, well, what's the good news? He said, I'm a pretty good accountant, I'll get you out of it. Mum said, no, that's not really how I sort of roll. So sold the family home, moved us to Christchurch, which is how we ended up in the infamous State House. So I only kind of tell you all that because the history of Mum was this incredibly determined woman. If you know anything about matriarchal Jewish mothers, you know, they think, you know, the sun shines out of their sons. And she was just utterly convinced I could do anything.
And your sisters would advocate for that,
yeah,
I've got
totally,
to say.
yeah, no,
the
no,
total
totally,
favourite of
yeah,
the family, they tell me.
Yeah, totally. So, you know, Mum was sort of like, oh, yeah, like I'd wander and say, I want to be Prime Minister. She'd go, oh, yeah, that's all good. What do you want for dinner? You know, like, I mean, she was very, you know, like there was no pushback, you know. And I think it just comes back, you were talking about hope, and Ian was talking about hope earlier. I mean, I think one of the things is, can you visualise that you're actually going to be able to do something? I mean, I think certainly most politicians are A-type personalities, very few aren't. And many people in this room will be, you know, that's how they've built successful companies, or they're doing the things that they're doing. And I always used to say to young people, you know, you've actually got to be able to visualise where you want to be. So when I was leader of the opposition, I swear to God, every morning I used to get up and say, in, you know, 714 days, whatever, I'll be Prime Minister.
Yeah.
Just worked out when the election would be, and every day I'd get up and say I'm going to be Prime Minister, because you've got to visualise that. And if you talk to the All Blacks, a lot of the training that they did was visualising what it'll be like when they're in a World Cup final with 10 minutes to play and they're ahead by 1 point or they're down by 1 point. And it's that kind of scenario.
There's a neat, and actually BMXer Sarah, Sarah.
Yeah, I know. Yep.
We know.
Yep.
She's one, and she puts it really neat. And she says your subconscious doesn't know the difference between the truth and a lie.
No.
So even if you don't quite believe it, if you keep telling your subconscious every day, I am confident I'm going to win, I'm going to make $1 million next year, and this is what it is, that becomes your truth.
And I tell you where you see it actually is with the SAS. They're amazing. At the moment, the SAS are all guys. They don't have to be. They can be girls. One hasn't qualified yet, but they will. They will, absolutely. And anyway, they're a bunch of these guys, and they're not what you think. I mean, everyone thinks, oh, Willie Apiata, and they're 6'4", and they're in amazing physical condition. I mean, they're all pretty strong and stuff, but they're often quite slim, wiry sort of guys. But they're mental. It's all mental, right? So what they do is when you do the sort of test to get in, they have a whole bunch of different things, but it lasts 3 days, and they starve you, they sleep deprive you, they do all these crazy things. You just got to get through it. And the very last test is essentially, I guess, a form an IQ test, but you're obviously completely sleep deprived and stuff. So what they do is they make you do all these things, and you fill a pack subject to the questions that they're asking you. And the more you get wrong, effectively, what you don't know is the heavier you're carrying the pack. So if it gets really bad and you're a real dunce, you're carrying 51 kilos. And the guy that was running the SAS when I was Prime Minister, Chris Parsons, a fantastic guy, was head of army for a long time. He was telling me, I think he carried 39 or something. But this is how bad it is. He says at the end of the thing, the last thing you do is a 60k walk with this pack on. And I said, what was it like? He said, well, I got 20 k's into the walk. I knew I was near the end. I knew it was the last thing we had to do. And he said, I felt this really weird sensation in my feet. And he said, so I took my boots off and I noticed I had these massive blood blisters all on the bottom of my feet. And I said, what'd you do? He said, oh, I did what you do, I got, it's not what I do. He said, I got a Swiss Army knife out, I slashed the bottom of my feet, drained the blood out, wrapped my feet like a geisha girl in tape, put them back in my shoes and walked the next 40 k's, right? And he said it's all mental. And they had a guy that, when I was Prime Minister, I said, well, why can't you join the SAS if you're just anybody off the street, fit person, why can't you do that? And they said, well, no particular reason. So they said, okay, you can apply. And they had a guy who was their trainer. He was a young guy who was their trainer. And they were convinced he could make it. He was mentally really strong. So anyway, they go through this thing, they put him through the course, they're a day and a half through it, they're walking up this river, and if you say you're out, and there's no coming back. So he's walking up this river with this pack on. He gets out of the river, gets on the side. I think it's freezing cold, middle of North Island. He goes, I'm out. And they go, what do you mean you're out? He goes, I'm out. I'm exhausted. I can't do it anymore. And they said, this is ridiculous. You're not out. He said, no, I'm out. He goes, no, you're not out. So they had this long conversation with him. They said, if you're really out, you're out. And he goes, I'm out. And they went, okay. And this van appeared from nowhere. And just as he was going to get in the van, they went to him and they said, tomorrow the Auckland Marathon's on. I want you to go and run it and then ring me after it. So he ran the marathon the next day in 2 hours something. And then they said, see, you weren't that tired. Like, it's all mental, eh? It's like, I mean, and I think that's a lot of what...
Sounds quite physical.
No, it's quite physical. It's quite physical. But the point is, I think you're quite capable, and that's what I think you learn. You will learn as a minister, but you learn when you're Prime Minister, you can survive on way less hours sleep than you think. You can handle a lot more stress than you think. The body can actually do a lot of things. Doesn't mean it's great for you, but you can do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which takes us nicely to life post-politics, really. So tell us a bit about what you're doing and have been doing kind of since you've left, and then we're going to get into the economics of the world and what's happening and your view on things. So.
Well, I was sort of lucky because I went into politics. I wasn't a career politician, and I was 40 when I kind of retired from banking to go into politics. And so when I left, I mean, the funny thing was when I went there, I'm quite analytic in that way, I suppose. So I sort of sat around and I worked out that the average length of time it took for someone to be Prime Minister, the 37 prior to me, was 18 years. So I thought, okay, if I do it in the average, I go in when I'm 40, I'll be 58. The average Prime Minister lasted 5.5 years. So I said, okay, I'll be 63 and a half and I'll retire. nice, happy days. Trouble was I got there the fastest in New Zealand's history, 6 years. So I was out by the time I was 55. So I thought, I better go do something else.
Thank God, no, 15 years
Yeah,
was enough for
yeah,
me.
that was a lot. I know that was enough. Yeah, no.
Yeah.
So basically, I thought, oh, look, in the end, I don't want to be an ambassador for New Zealand. I mean, they were all fantastic things, and those people do an amazing job for us, but it's not what I want to do. And so I thought, well, look, I don't want to go and run something full time because I want to get my life back and have a bit of work-life balance. So I was effectively done that, and I'm chairman of ANZ, and I'm on ANZ's group board. But what I've sort of worked out is I actually don't want to go on thousands of boards. They dictate your diary, and there's a lot of it's compliance and all that sort of stuff. So I am on Palo Alto Networks, so we're the largest cybersecurity company in the world. So we're obviously, it's pretty big at the moment, given what's happening around with cyber in the world. But
And is that that's US based?
yeah, we're in Silicon Valley. Yeah. We're in in San Fran, and then basically I'm an advisor to Comcast, so we're the largest cable and broadcasting company in the world. So we own NBC, we own the Golf Channel that lots of Ian stuff goes on. I'm an advisor to Impossible Foods, so we're making plant-based meat. We're the guys who are in every Burger King in America. So amazing product, actually, fantastic product. I'm on BP's advisory board in London, which is quite an amazing company because they want to get rid of oil is what they do, actually, by about 25 years. So they're doing lots of things. So lots of different companies like that, a few startups in Silicon Valley. So up until COVID, I was probably traveling a bit too much. But actually with COVID, now I just have some very unsociable calls at 2 o'clock in the morning, but it's quite cool. I have lots of time to play golf, and this sounds really crazy, but I'm actually learning to fly a helicopter. Oh my God. So I know. So I'm halfway through. So if I don't make it, then you won't see much more of me. But I think I'll be okay. It's all going to be good. So anyway, I'm not learning the Robinson.
Will Brona go up with
you?
you?
Oh God, no, not in 100 million years. No, even Max thinks I'm having a midlife crisis. I said, mate, that will make me 120 because I'm 60 this year. No, I just want to do it. But mentally, man, you feel wrecked after an hour of concentrating on this thing. But anyway, my hovering's going quite well, and it's all going. I'm doing circuits, and I was up yesterday, so that was quite cool.
God, there are some great stories, and I'm diverting, I know, but of, like when you were Prime Minister and what they will and won't let you do.
Yeah, I know.
And they just get beside themselves. When I was acting occasionally, when I don't think I ever acted when you were out of the country because there was enough people ahead of me, but for Bill, obviously, I acted. And they honestly, like driving your own car, they are really
I didn't drive really.
Almost anti that, but racing cars, there's examples of where they stopped you,
miles of stuff, yeah. The only thing I did that really kind of drove them nuts which I didn't like, was I did a skydive. But I did it with the SAS. And I thought, oh, well, God, how bad can it go? I mean, not really that bad. So anyway, I didn't tell anyone. I didn't tell Bill. Bill and Stephen Joyce lost the plot.
Yeah, he did.
He rang and lectured me and said, this is irresponsible and you're going to die and all this sort of stuff. Anyway, I thought, oh God, I'm not going to bloody die. It was an amazing thing. I went out, I decided, because we thought, oh, someone will run a story about me wasting taxpayers' money. So I said, I'll go on an SAS training day. They're going anyway. Yeah. So I went in this herc out of Whanuapai. Anyway, we get there, and they say, I'll come out at 7 o'clock. And you imagine all the fanfare when you're Prime Minister and you turn up. Well, the guy who I was attached to, there was zero fanfare. His name was Jono, and Jono was like about 160 kgs. He was massive, eh? He goes, you, come here. I go, okay. He goes, when we go out, it's like this, hands like this. He goes, when we get to the end of the thing, by the way, you're going out. If you're not going out, I'm just shoving you out. And that's the way it is. We go, okay, fine. Any training? He goes, no, you don't need training. That was it. There was no training, like no shit, just like basically. And then they gave me a gun because they all carry guns, believe it or not, when they're jumping out of the plane. I go, what do I need this for? And he went, I'll shoot you with it if you don't do your job properly. I went, okay. It's like, holy shit, all right. So anyway, you get to the edge of this thing, you're standing there. And this is the other thing. They don't all love jumping out of these planes. So half of them are crossing themselves and pumping themselves up. Anyway, the whole thing. So we get off this thing, we go out, and they had these two guys, I think, who were jump masters, who I think the theory was if something really went wrong and the chute didn't open, I'm not guaranteeing they could have done something, but maybe they could have. Anyway, they pulled the ripcord, and it was the most amazing day because the cloud was at 5,000 feet, and we jumped at 15,000 feet, and they pulled the ripcord at 6. So you're about 1,000 feet above the cloud. And when these guys who are filming it, I've got all the film of it, when Jono pulled the ripcord and obviously it opened, they just flipped on their backs and went through the backs through the clouds. It was really cool.
That's cool.
And they were filming. Anyway, it was quite funny. And I spoke to him afterwards. He hadn't done as many jumps as you think. He'd done 900. So that's not actually that many. Like lots of these guys have done, 10,000, Anyway, I said to him, do you like it? He said, the first 50 I did, I hated it. But he said, I wanted to be in the SAS, and you've got to jump out of a plane if you're in the SAS. So he did, and then it was really funny because after the lecture I got from everyone at work, I rang up, the first person I rang actually, I texted Brian and said I'm alive, and then I rang Bill and I said, the jump went well, and he goes, you gonna go again? And I went, probably not. And he went, bugger. So I think he spotted an opportunity. At that point, I figured he wanted to be Prime Minister, But it was all good. So anyway, no, but look, basically, then there's a whole bunch of things they never let you do. Yeah, they will never let you. But you can't drive, and you can't do this, and you can't do that.
Yeah.
John had driving lessons after he was no longer Prime Minister.
Wow.
Yeah, I didn't. I was fine. I mean, I occasionally drove. But it's sort of nuts. You're in a cocooned life, really.
But there is that kind of thing that's cool about New Zealand, though, as well. As like one of the women here was telling me that, she had an overseas visitor years ago when you were Prime Minister. She's at the airport, sitting there, and you literally walk in with the DPS and sit yourself down at the table next to them, and she turns around and goes, "Well, hello, Prime Minister." At which your guest went, "What?" And so that is kind of cool about New Zealand as well, is that
now
it's
I take
small
lots
and
of
it's personable.
Uber trips.
Do you Uber?
Yeah, I take Uber a lot. And mostly they all want photos, afterwards. And but the first time one of the first times I took an Uber, I took it to the airport. It was right after I'd retired, and I get in this Uber, and it's pretty weird because there are rules under which you can use a Crown car, but I sort of couldn't really be bothered with them. I hardly use them. Anyway, I get in this Uber, and you could see that she was a young Indian girl, and she was looking at me, and she looked at me, and she was looking in the rear vision mirror the whole way, and she was going like, eventually. She said, "You look a lot like John Key." And I went, "He was great, that guy." And she went, yeah, no. Carried on. Anyway, so,
I get it as well a lot. Do people tell you look like Paula Bennett? I'm like, I've heard it before. Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about. I mean, we've got Cameron Baggery tomorrow.
Cameron,
So let's by all means talk about the New Zealand economy as well and where it's going, and property we'd like to talk a bit about. But tell us, particularly with your ANZ role and that sort of thing, and actually all those boards and advisory roles that you've got, a bit about the global economy, and talk to us about where you think that's all heading and what it's looking like, and this is your thing.
Yeah, okay, so property, there's three things that drive property, I'm sure you all know this. So essentially interest rates, jobs and migration. So they're the three big factors, and essentially why they're pretty much in that order is that if you go and borrow money to buy a house, just let's take residential for a moment, then pretty simply people go along and say, how much can I, they work backwards. Fundamentally, how much do I earn, how much can therefore I afford to pay? And let's say your mortgage is 2.5% at the moment, for want of an argument. Then the banks actually chuck in their models much higher numbers, over double that. So they stress test themselves that you can afford it when rates go up a bit. It doesn't mean that it doesn't have quite a big impact. So when everybody runs around, by the way, and says, it's terrible, house prices are going up, they don't really mean it. Okay, I know politicians say that all the time. They don't really mean it. I'll tell you why they don't mean it. What happens when house prices go up is you get what's called the wealth effect. And even though mum and dad, they borrow $500,000, they buy the house for $1 million, it's worth $1 million, one day they wake up and go, whoa, 3 years later it's worth $1.5 million. They'll tell you how bad it is, but they go to Myrtle and they go, dear, we're worth $1 million, and they go out for dinner and they spend money. They really do. So the pace of increase has been too high, but they still like it. So it's all about interest rates, and if you believe they're going to track up, they'll have some impact. Jobs, can people keep paying the mortgage? Migration is quite a big factor. So it has been, saying the blindly obvious, going crazy. So just to give you an example, what we call system growth, how much do the banks lend in residential? On average, that's 15 billion a year. Just to give you an example, in the last 12 months, it's been 30 billion. So ANZ, we're 1 in 3 home loans. We're the biggest in the country. And just to give you an example, September, October, November, December, just at ANZ, we lent $1 billion a month. Just ANZ.
Wow.
So we're lending 15 billion a year now at the moment.
And that's to New Zealand or New Zealand and Australia?
No, just New Zealand. No, that's just New Zealand. So it is going nuts out there. Now, I mean, some things are changing. So one thing I reckon that will happen is that if you look at apartments, so in 2019, 30% of all new apartments were sold to first home buyers. We just changed our rules to say if you're above 38 squares, we'll lend you money if you're a first home buyer or if you're a purchaser of an apartment, and you only need 20% deposit. And we did that because actually the bulk of apartments are above 38 squares. There is some part of the market that's under 38, but lots above 38. And so this year we think 60% of apartments will be sold to first home buyers.
Wow.
So quite big numbers. So the only other thing I'd say that's a bit strange, and I reckon it'll be interesting to see what happens, is the government's changed the rules around both bright line test and deductibility. So I reckon that it's a bit uncertain actually on some of the rules around deductibility. I'm not the absolute expert in it, but effectively if you buy a new build, it'll be deductible. Outside that, it won't be. So this is what I reckon the perverse outcome they're going to get. I reckon investors are going to move away a bit from the historical, I buy a little, little do up and I keep that. I reckon they're going to start going and buying these terraced houses, which everyone thinks is crazy, but that's what we're starting to see at ANZ. Investors coming in and saying, I'll buy the lot, all 8 of them on this development. And the reason is because it's deductible, or I'll tell you what they're also doing at the moment. Coming into us and they're saying, okay, I've got this thing, it's now been under the new unitary plan zone for terraced housing. We've got a renter on it and we get $600 a week. We don't really have that much money, but we want to bowl it. We want to borrow all the money to do the development on that. We'll go and sell 4 of them and then we'll keep 4 of them. And the 4 we keep on them gives us $2,400 a week in rent. But I reckon it'll be an unintended consequence that the government isn't thinking about, because really that terraced housing market was designed, it's normally between 600 and 900,000, and it's all designed for first home buyers. And I reckon you'll actually find investors starting to do that.
Yeah, to move into it and that
So that's sort of what's happening there.
Can we talk a bit about China?
Yeah.
You've got a great relationship and have had as Prime Minister. There's no doubt about it that what's happening in China, even the changes in US at the moment, and the global impacts that can have, and that it's kind of, they sneeze and we catch a cold kind of thing as far as trade and things are concerned. With COVID, it's probably not the best analogy anymore.
Well,
I didn't do that intentionally either.
No, it's quite clever actually, quite clever.
Let's stick with China a bit at the moment. I mean, massive, and look, there's some challenges for us as far as some of the human rights issues that are going on with China, and yet our trade relationship, and how important that is to us and the relationship that we've had in the past. What do you think the future looks like, and what would you do?
Yeah, well, I like to think it could be messy, actually. When I first became Prime Minister in 2008, I think two-way trade was something like about 11 billion, and we just signed the FTA with China, the free trade agreement. And then our government went on to actually sign the free trade agreement with all parts of one China, so Hong Kong and Taiwan, so we're the only westernised democracy that has that. And what happened back in the day in 2008 was that two-way trade was much more balanced in favour of China. So we imported a lot more than we exported. And effectively what happened with the FTA was that we got access into their market with no tariffs for big amounts, so dairy and particularly infant baby formula. So $5 billion of it's infant baby formula on its own. But all of those kind of products, cheese, fish, you name it, kiwi fruit's massive market. I do a bit of work for Zespri, and by far their biggest market is China. So what happened was that two-way trade's ballooned out to, you can pick any number you want, but they're our largest counterpart by far. So people talk about Australia, but Australia in goods and services doesn't buy anything near what China does. So two-way trade might be 35, 40 billion. It's a very large number. So then you sort of look at it and you say, okay, well, if you go through the variety of different issues that people worry about, the plight of the Uyghurs, the South China Seas, there's a whole bunch of them, what's happening in Taiwan, what's happening in Hong Kong, you can kind of name them, human rights issues, environmental degradation, there's a freaking million. They've all been there. They were all there when I was Prime Minister, they were all there in varying different forms. They're all there beforehand and afterwards. So I think the question that ultimately comes down is, are we not going to trade with the country because we don't like some aspects of what they do? If that's your view, good on you and good luck, but you won't be trading with anyone. Because last time I looked, we actually don't like the United States policy on the death penalty they have. We don't like Guantanamo Bay. You know, there are tons of things that happen in lots of countries we don't like. It doesn't mean that we have to sit back like a little lamb chop and never say anything, but like anything in life, actually, if you have a relationship with people, in my opinion, you're more likely to be able to have a sensible conversation with them and have some input. So what's happened with China is that I think it's fair to say when I was around, there was a more positive view, and Obama was really trying to sort of do quite a bit with them and get China going, I suppose, more. And what happened was Trump changed the global narrative on China. And the reason was Trump, he didn't succeed in lots of things, but he did succeed in that because he needed a bogeyman. See, his voters were the most unlikely voters in the world for a guy who claims at least to be a billionaire, right? So he went to the flyover states, to Detroit and stuff, and he went to all those people in Michigan and he said, the reason that you have a shitty life with no job and all this stuff is because China doesn't play fair. Steals intellectual property, pays people a bowl of rice a day, they're not good people, and and I'm going to deal to them. And the way I'm going to manage that relationship is I'm going to say the relationship's managed by the trade imbalance, and I'm going to make the trade imbalance less. Right? That was his argument. It was a pretty simple argument, but it worked because those people do feel like their life isn't very good. And that sort of carried on around the world, and it's changed the rhetoric. The problem is that if you look at China, nothing's going to stop that juggernaut. And what the Americans actually really don't like is it is going to become a superpower and a far less indebted one than the United States, which now currently owes $24 trillion. And Biden's borrowing plan is $6 trillion at the moment. He's got 4 programs that are $1.5 trillion each. And by the way, a trillion is 1,000 million billion, so it's a bloody lot. Okay, so essentially the point being that and I think if you look at China, look, I'm not saying everything's perfect and I'm not saying everything's great, but what I am saying is that they are lifting 400 million people out of poverty. They were the reason that the GFC was far less significant in New Zealand because they bought a lot of stuff. And I think the challenge for New Zealand is can we have a good trading relationship with them while at the same time expressing concerns where we genuinely see them in an even-handed sort of way. I'm not arguing we're going to get up every morning and say we are more like the Chinese than we are like the Americans. It's not true. Our traditional allies with America, the United Kingdom, Australia and Canada, they are the Five Eyes partners that we have. And most people will tell you, even as the population becomes increasingly Asian in New Zealand, will tell you that that's what they associate with as our traditional allies. We think we have more in common with them culturally, and frankly, we probably do. But the fact that we don't have share always the same cultural beliefs as China doesn't mean we can't trade really well with them. And I think we just got to be careful getting dragged into a situation where we lose that relationship because in the end, all things aren't equal. And this is the crazy thing. Australia's out there belting the Chinese at the moment. So now they've got a barley beef ban that, go and be a wine exporter out of Australia, you're in real trouble at the moment. The market's closed. Lobsters are very cheap, which is cool if you go to Woolworths, but they can't actually sell them in China. You go through all this stuff. But do you know who they're buying all those products from? They're actually buying them from America. The very people they're theoretically making the arguments for. So on the one hand, America's telling them be the sheriff of the South, and on the other hand, they're exporting all their beef to them because they're no longer buying it from Australia. That is dumb. That's the definition of dumb. So, we got to be a bit smarter than that.
One of my closest friends is in produce and exports from New Zealand and Australia and into China, and she just said, literally without warning and overnight, they let the containers turn up at their Chinese ports, and they just stopped the ones from Australia.
Yeah. No, I
and
totally
said they will rot there. Because of the way that
and they can do it lots of ways. They can do it lots of things. So, look, in the end, I always think New Zealand's a little country at the bottom of the world. No one knows us a living. We've kind of got to make our way in the world. We can't fix every wrong, and it doesn't mean that we actually don't stand up for what we believe in. There's a big difference. We used to have lots of conversations with the Chinese and many other countries about things that we were concerned about and things we wanted to see change. But China is changing. Actually, I could make an argument with you. China's doing more about climate change policy than the United States is.
Yeah, I agree with you.
So
I'm an ex-climate change minister, and they just literally overnight
decided they were going to do something,
do something and that it would actually increase their reputation in the world, to be quite blunt,
Yeah.
and that they had a responsibility to do it. They closed 100 coal plants,
Yeah.
literally, within like a month of saying they would, to bring down their emissions. And so on a relative scale for what they can do for global emissions, compared to what little old New Zealand can, is significant if actually...
They've got to be part of it. They've got to be part of the solution. Doesn't mean that we shouldn't do our bit. I mean, I think like anything and actually New Zealand's done some good things. The emissions trading scheme's been amazing. Like, as you know, our government never, once we passed the emissions trading scheme, there was never a coal-fired power plant or fossil fuel power plant created in New Zealand. So everything was renewable. It was all either a little more hydro, but largely actually it was geothermal and a bit of solar and wind.
Okay, let's talk a bit more then about that trade, because there's some genuine concerns for us as being New Zealand at the moment, both and you touched on it earlier with migration and us being able to get the workers that we need. These guys are all in property, and I'm in property, and so what I can say is you can see more and more, land going to housing that actually has been for growing and that trade. I was just listening to a podcast the other day and with your orchardists, and they're saying, they're genuinely concerned for the next generation that's going to go, it's too hard. We can't get the people to pick the fruit. We're at this sort of, and so do we just sell the land, and it's going to go into housing, and so, yay us, but at the other end, it is our generator for generations, and we are, I think, at a real precipice of time as a country to see where we're going to. So I suppose my question to you, John, is how do we as New Zealand grow our wealth over the next 10 years?
Yeah, okay, so I think firstly, if you just look at food, if you look at what New Zealand's done really well at, it's been food production's been one of the core parts of where we've made money. And the reason for that is we are just really blessed. So we have very arable land in New Zealand. We have very good rainfall as a general rule, not in Auckland at the moment, but generally, and we have very good sunshine and temperate climate. So we're not like, if you go and have a look at Death Valley at 56 degrees the other day, but if you look at Australia, they always used to say, New Zealand was 1,000 sheep per acre and Australia was 1,000 acres per sheep. And the reason for that is just it's really hot and it's not wet, and all these issues that they get. And I think New Zealand's going to carry on being good at producing food for a long time. That's just the reality. We're actually just naturally really suited for it. I think the challenge for us is to move a bit away, which we've been doing enormously over the years, into much more value-added products. And I think Fonterra's tried that for a long time. Its problem has been, and the reason it produces so much, basically milk powder, which is not very high value-added, dries a lot of milk, is because it gets a massive amount of milk at a certain time, and there's very little it can do with it. Whereas if you go and speak to Tatua, they've been much better, for instance, at producing other products,
high
value added. Yep. So I think we might produce less volume, but actually I think we produce higher quality. And you're seeing that with Zespri, where it's producing gold kiwi fruit. G3's been hugely successful, and now it's actually moving into red kiwi fruit and lots of other things. So I think, but what we'll do is we'll use technology and science and R&D to drive all that. So that's really important. I think there is actually in New Zealand a very creative side thing. I mean, Ian's a great example of that, and there's lots of other companies that fit in that space, whether it's a rocket lab or whatever it might be. I mean, I just think if you get to the question of migration, I'm pro-migration, right? So the reason I'm pro-migration is, firstly, if you just say we can't handle more people, kind of Winston's argument. You remember him. If you go back to that argument, there's just nonsense, isn't it? I mean, honestly, we've got the geographical footprint of Great Britain, and last time I looked, they've got 65 million people or something, all of them with COVID, from what I can see at the moment. But anyway, the basic argument is they have a lot of people. So essentially, we can handle more people. What people don't like about migration is not that someone looks different from them or sounds different from them. That's not really the driver. What the issue is, they think that migration will reduce their standard of living. They think they'll be in a traffic jam longer, they won't get their kid in the local school, they won't get grandma into the hospital. So if you want to have a sustainable long-term migration policy, you actually have to build the infrastructure that supports that. And you probably do have to change a bit of your, intensification of where you live and different sorts of things that you do. But I think if you look at migration, the reason why I think it's good is that I think that when people leave a country to come somewhere else, that is such an enormous thing to do. Like you're leaving your family, you're leaving your friends, you're leaving the culture you came from. And, with the greatest respect, I understand that there's 5% unemployment in New Zealand, and it's kind of structural full employment, is what an economist would tell you. But, okay, if you were allowed to come tomorrow from Germany, and you were on our working holiday scheme, and you were 19 years of age, and you barely spoke English, within 24 hours you would have a job. Okay, you might be picking fruit, and you might be at the local cafe, but you would be working. Because as my mother used to say to me, son, if you're fond of eating, you'll be fond of working. So, there's a sort of correlation there, right? And it's true.
Oh,
and so they
Croatian,
honestly,
because they're my people, right? Yeah, I'm a Western people. My God,
They work.
And
I remember years ago, I was leader of the opposition. I went to this factory in South Auckland, and honestly, it was quite a big factory, and it was quite manual sort of stuff. And I walked in, and I just noticed that everyone in there was Pākehā Caucasian. There were hundreds of people, and I said to the guy, since you know much of migrant workforce, and he said, maybe those people here. And I went, okay. Anyway, the labour market's tightened up, we became government, labour market's got harder because, employment started growing. Anyway, I went back to that place about 5 years later, and it was like the United Nations. And I said, man, it's changed. He said, I'm not having those Pākehās here anymore. These Chinese are bloody great, mate. They turn up and they don't fail a drug test and blah, blah, blah. And, so my point basically is that they bring a certain thing which is, that you've just got to have undying respect for. Whether they're driving an Uber at night and they're doing these things during the day. So I'm not saying everything's perfect. And I'm not saying we should be 60 million people, don't get me wrong. But what I am saying is that I think a sensible migration policy, firstly, makes New Zealand's outlook more international. Secondly, they create a diaspora for which we can actually take our things to the world. But certainly make food and eating a hell of a lot more interesting. But I think they just add to the richness of New Zealand. And I mean, I saw Ian's presentation. I mean, he's right. I mean, New Zealand is a multicultural society built on a bicultural foundation. That's the basis of the treaty in New Zealand, and it's the basis of the country. But we're a multicultural country, and actually that's something to be celebrated. It makes us better. So I just think that when people come, they've just got, I don't care so much whether they bring capital. That's nice if they do sometimes because they're great. But actually what I really want them to bring is the right attitude. And that doesn't mean they have to stop believing in Croatia or whatever. They don't have to be more Kiwi than the Kiwis. But there'll be things that bind us all together, and then there'll be certain things where they have an interest or a belief in the one thing that they do. And might be driven by religion, or it might be driven by where they came from or whatever. But you're going to have a look at, take a place like Auckland in the South African community. Show me an unemployed South African person, because I'll tell you what, there sure as hell aren't many of them.
No, that's
They have come here and worked their butt off.
Yeah.
So I just think that we want more of that, really.
Yeah.
And I can't see why we wouldn't accommodate. I just don't see why we'd create this fear. And I think if we're going to change, the long-term unemployment issues and things we've got, we're actually not going to do it by starving employers of people who actually turn up. That is not going to work. We're going to have to do a lot more with those other people, but we're certainly not going to do it by just saying to kiwi fruit growers, you can't have any labour and your kiwi fruit's got to rot on the vine, because it's not going to work.
So I won't get on my bandwagon, but, I am one of those that throws out there that Auckland should have twice the population.
Yep.
And it makes everyone gasp. And I'm not saying that in the next 5 years, and I'm actually not saying that in the next 10. But let's set a date, and let's actually have, the conversation about what size our city should be, what size this country should be as far as a population. And I'm going to go back to asking you a bit about that infrastructure, because that's the challenge, right? Is that we think that more cars, it's going to slow us down, we can't get to work, so you want to bring in more people. And crikey, it takes me 40 minutes in the morning to get from Te Atatu Peninsula, into Wynyard Quarter, and quite frankly, increasing the population. But in your businesses, if I said to you, next year I can guarantee you another 100 customers, you know, by this sort of date, you'd go out and you'd actually borrow against those 100 to make sure that you had in place the plant that you needed, the people you needed, so that you could then provide for them and make sure that you can give the right service to those 100 customers. And it's a bit like that with migration. So I'm on your side. I just think that we can see it now that we're keeping afloat economically because of the kind of predominantly government spend that's going on and the interest rates we've got and how that's happening. And that can't go on forever. You know, like that sweetener has to stop. And when that happens, is our economy strong enough to really pick up and our businesses keep going without the workforce that they need? And then shouldn't we be having good debt now, which is... I'm going to now stop on my bandwagon. And by the way, I'm not running for mayor, because every time I have that rant, people go, oh, she's running for mayor. I just give a damn about this country and kind of what we can do.
Well, first things first is the population of Auckland's going up. Doesn't matter who is in power, what they tell you and what they promise you, it's going up. So Auckland has been the home of almost, the majority of external and internal migration. People moving from Dunedin, people moving from Christchurch, people moving from wherever, Samoa, Beijing, you name it. They come to Auckland. Why? Well, external migration, a lot of the reasons is that people feel, it's why they live in communities. They do come and they feel for a second, they go, I want to feel a bit more like I'm at home. And so, big South African community on the North Shore, for instance, big Croatian community in West Auckland. It's just natural. It's human nature. There's tons of Kiwis, by the way, in certain parts of London. It just is what it is. It's the way we work. Doesn't mean we don't integrate, but we do that. But what's going to happen post-COVID-19, actually, is that, and when the world gets back to some sense of normality, New Zealand's going to look really good. And it's going to look really good because, essentially, most people around the world have been locked down or in fear of catching it or in fear of dying, It's a very, very serious issue. And so for them, New Zealand looks like a nirvana where we haven't had COVID-19 in any material form. Now, I can create lots of arguments with you about why the vaccine rollout's badly handled and all these different things. But if you put the politics to one side, the simple facts of life are, if you live in the United States at the moment, and lots of other countries, I reckon you look at New Zealand and think this would be a great place to come and invest and be part of. And so if that's what you believe, that's certainly what I believe, they are going to come as long as they're allowed to come. And again, I think we'll actually attract some incredibly good people. I also think the work is going to change. I'm not a fan of believing that no one's ever going to go into the ANZ again or no one's going to do things. But I do think that technology and COVID's taught us that we can run businesses remotely, and so we need a mixture actually of the two, but it will change. I'm less certain, I've got to say, about commercial and industrial real estate than I am residential. I mean, I think industrial is flying because manufacturing's doing well, but I think commercial, it is really uncertain about how do we want, like at ANZ, for instance, we have Sylvia Park, where we have our contact centre, but increasingly we're running a contact centre remotely. And we will go back in there, but I'm not sure we'll go back in the same way that we were. Even at ANZ, down in Albert Street, it's an issue. So I think on the infrastructure, you do have to build it. And the trouble is you've got to get ahead of it, and no one does. And so they always take a long, long time. But one of the reasons we signed off on the CBD rail tunnel wasn't because I absolutely loved it or we wanted to spend the billions of dollars we did. But the reality is, and it's been a nightmare in terms of the way it's been executed at the moment because my office is right side of it, I can tell you. It's quite hard getting to work. But the simple facts of life are, it means that Britomart no longer has 12 trains now, it has 60. And once you do that, you can start getting a proper use of public transport of a form that works. So I think you will see a lot of that. And I think this latest thing where they're talking about intensification around rail spots and stuff, you're going to see some quite valuable land around those railway stations at the risk of telling you what to buy. They're going 6 stories and nothing's going to stop it. So that value is going to get probably has already been revalued very, very quickly.
Yeah. And we've got, we're lucky enough to have people here from all over New Zealand.
Yeah.
I just met a wonderful woman from Picton before, and we've got, people have really travelled to be here. So that infrastructure throughout New Zealand, and we can see the population growth happening outside of Auckland as well. As more people want to move to towns, more young people, we can see opportunities kind of happening. Would you spend more more on that sort of that national infrastructure,
Yep.
if that's where
I
it
mean,
was.
it takes a long time. Like in 08, we campaigned on the campaign trail in 08 for the Waikato Expressway, and they're only just finishing it. I remember going in must have been about 2012. I met this guy. He actually looked quite young looking. He worked for whoever it was, Fulton Hogan, whoever was doing the work. And I said to him, how's it going? He said, oh, God. And he said, I'll take you for a drive. And we were in this digger, and he was going away. We went with me and him and 3 cops. Like anyone was going to get me in the middle of sort of nowhere. But anyway, fine. So it was all good. And we're going along, and he said, yeah, this is really cool. I love this project. This is the last project I'm ever going to work on. I went, why? And he goes, this is it. I'll be retired by the time it's finished. And I said, God, how old are you? And he said, I'm 58, but I want to retire when I'm 65. It'll take. He's right. He was absolutely right. It'll take 7 years to finish. The only reason, Waterview had been on the books for 25 years. The only reason they got Waterview done is because Stephen Joyce and the Cabinet passed infrastructure of national significance. And I think that's, you were talking about debt earlier. I do worry, if you want me to be a bit political, I worry about the way the government's spending money like drunken sailors, I mean, basically, they're going to borrow $100 billion over the next 4 years. So the point really becomes not about whether you borrow money, because at some point you've always got to pay the piper. You've always got to pay that money back, and more of your budget becomes on interest rate servicing, than health or education or something else. But there's a way big difference between good debt and bad debt. And if you build, essentially productivity enhancing infrastructure, that's good debt. And your tax take goes up. Whereas if you spend it just on essentially consumables, fundamentally it's bad debt. And you've got to, and it's no different from saying, if I go and get my house and I borrow $50,000 from the mighty ANZ and I build myself a new kitchen, a new bathroom, I'll sell the house for more. That's probably true. If I borrow $50,000 and under normal circumstances go on a big overseas holiday, at the end of it I might have had a lovely time, but I still owe the ANZ 50 grand.
I was thinking golf memberships.
Well, golf membership, that is true too. Helicopter hours, all sorts of things, you can spend on it.
Yeah, it's just like the household budget
exactly
as opposed to what we're doing as a country. And at the moment we're borrowing for all sorts of things, which we saw some of that stimulus and what we kind of needed. Yeah, you need to do it. We did it in the Christchurch earthquakes. I mean, borrowing for wage subsidies is not new. I mean, we kind of built the playbook on how to do that, and it saved lots of jobs. And we did it in lots of we've done it in other places as well. It's just that you can't, in the end, if you spend more than you earn, you go broke. It's really, really simple. And New Zealand has to get back to earning more than it spends. So it's got to ask the question, how's it earn the money? And I think, raising taxes, this is the crazy thing with raising taxes, right? So there was a famous French economist guy called Patrick Latvia, and he was the guy that they wheeled in to speak to George Herbert Bush to explain to him why he should be cutting taxes. Reagan, why he should cut taxes. And he got a napkin at the Plaza Hotel in New York, and he drew on this thing, and he said, as your nominal tax rate goes down, the amount of tax revenue you earn goes up, which no one thinks, right? And the current government don't. They think if you raise the rate, you'll earn more. But you don't. And the reason you don't is everyone in this room will be doing what I'm telling thousands of New Zealanders are. They're wandering off to KPMG and PwC and everybody else, and they're saying, okay, how do I keep as much money as I can in my company so that I don't have to pay 39% top tax rate, I have it 28%. And we align the top rate, the company rate, and the trust rate all at the same rate. And look, the more you get to a point where it's just a fair amount. Like, I must admit, I look at it now and I think I pay, like everybody else, 40% plus 15% GST, which some idiot put up. I think it was me. And so, stuff like that. And so sometimes I sit there and I go, you know what, I just don't want to go to Australia and give that speech. Because I'm going to get paid a lot for it, and then I'm going to pay 40% away, and then I'll just do this, and be 2 days of my life I'm never getting back. And so productivity is affected
it makes
by...
you stop. You spend a lot of time wondering how to, you wonder why people in the old days bought kiwi fruit, which is, they kept them, they're fantastic, but they bought all sorts of kiwi fruit and Nigerian film investments and all sorts of things. They're all just to get their taxes down.
Yeah.
And I'm not arguing at 39 cents, it's like it was when Muldoon was around, it was 66 cents, but you do soon get to the point where people stop earning. And I think, we've got, essentially, we need people out there taking risks and doing things.
Yeah,
That's what pays the bills.
I mean,
if you look at ANZ, just to give you an example, we pay 5% of all corporate tax in New Zealand.
Wow.
So you can get rid of ANZ if you want to, which some people seem to want to do. You can get rid of it if you want to, but 5% of all corporate tax goes. Like, you go and have a look at the stats of how much the top personal taxpayers pay in the country and what percentage of tax it is. It's huge. Something like, I can't even remember now, but it's like 10% of all taxpayers pay, the bulk of tax in New Zealand. So it's all great, but I mean, you actually need those people. You can knock them for all you like, but you actually need them.
You do. Okay, let's. We've got sort of 10 minutes left, so let's talk a bit about. I don't know, interesting people that you've met. I mean, you spent time with the Queen.
Yeah, the Queen. She's lovely, actually. Tiny, but lovely.
Short.
Yeah. Tiny. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, tiny.
No.
I mean, the amazing thing with her is that she has met
incredible.
everybody. I mean, I don't know whether it was 14 US presidents, and she has amazing stories about people. And incredibly authentic. Actually believes that it's not just the briefing note or whatever. She actually knows who she's met and why, and incredibly lucid. So, yeah, her stories are.
Did she drive you?
Yeah, she drove us when we went to Balmoral. She drove us up to the barbecue. It was pretty cool, actually. It was quite fun, actually.
So barbecue. Yeah. So because you got this amazing opportunity to stay at Balmoral, and you took the kids then.
Yeah.
Didn't you? How old would they have been then?
Max was 16.
Yeah. Okay.
And Steffi was 18, I think.
Yeah.
And so they do. When you go for the typical pattern is you go for 2 nights, and you either have a barbecue, and a black tie event, and some nights the first night might be black tie, and the second night might be barbecue, and the other way around, and they just decide on the day, which is fine for me. I can put a black tie suit on in about 2 minutes, but for Brona and Steffi, it was fairly major. I'm putting on and so as it turned out, the first night we went, the Friday night, we actually had this barbecue, and we were having all these drinks. And I said to the Queen, I said, "Oh, is the barbecue here?" And she said, "Oh, no." And she said, "Oh, we probably should get going, and I'll take you there." And I said, "Oh, right." And I said, "Is it close by? Can we walk?" And she said, No, we have to drive up there." And I went, "Oh, okay." And we went out the front, and there was this whole line of, and Will and Kate were there because they'd come for the weekend, because the Queen decided, because our kids were there, have some young people and stuff. So there's this range of this whole line of Range Rovers, and her one, they're all in British racing green, and her one had a little corgi on the front of it, like you get the Mercedes style thing, and the doors
like
open.
The Jaguar, but
yeah, the doors open, and she said to me and Brian, she said, "Come on, get in." And I said, "Are you driving?" And she went, "Yep." And Will just looked at me and went, "Good luck." The kids are coming with me. Anyway, she's a great driver, actually. She was fantastic. We were like 7 miles up and down. She was amazing because at the very end of the last day, they do this thing, and last day you go to church. They've got this little church you probably would have seen on TV that they go for New Year's. They go all the time when they're there. And anyway, we were having lunch, and I said to her after church, and I said, "Oh, what happens today?" And she said, "Mr. Cameron's coming today." And I'm quite good mates with David, and I didn't actually realise he was coming. And I went, "Oh, right. Is he coming for a couple of days?" And she said, "Well, he's meant to, but there's a problem in Downing Street." And there was a lot of problems in Downing Street, as it turned out. But anyway, she said, "So he's only going to stay Sunday night. He's not staying Monday night." And I said to her, but then you'd kind of been there 2 days, and I'd met her lots of times before anyway. And she's really lovely. So I said to her, "Look, I know this is sort of like a stupid, Antipodean question, but out of interest, like what happens on Monday night? Is anyone else here?" And she said, "No, it's just me and the Duke and obviously the staff and stuff, but no." And I said, "No, it sounds crazy, but what will you do? Like put your jammies on and watch TV, or like what happens on Monday night?" And she said, "No, at 5:30 they'll draw me a bath and I'll put a long dress on, and Duke will put black tie on, and we'll go to dinner." And I said, "So it's just the two of you?" She said, "Yes." And I said, "There's no guests?" And she said, "No." I said, "Just you and the staff?" She went, "Yes." I said, "Why on earth would you do that?" And she just looked at me, she said, "Well, Prime Minister, I'm the last bastion of standards in the United Kingdom. I intend to maintain them." So I went, "Okay, fair enough. I'll put my jammies on and watch TV." But no, it's amazing, yeah. So she is really amazing. But I met lots of other things. But the funniest story, actually, I haven't told many people this story, but it's really crazy about. But I went to COP19, which is what you do for climate change, and it was in Copenhagen, and the whole thing was a disaster. The whole thing, nothing worked. Obama gave the speech, they almost booed him. He was new. In fact, I've just read his book, and he was talking about it in his book. The whole thing was a bloody disaster. Anyway, my guys said, we weren't going to go, and then Greenpeace had a sausage sizzle to raise money to send me, which they never gave me the money for. But anyway, we went. So anyway, it was all good. So we go off to this thing. Anyway, in the end we went. It was all fine. So the whole thing was just, I tell you, a chaotic disaster. But at the end of about 1 o'clock, they broke and they said, okay, go to lunch. You know how you have the thing, the leaders go off for lunch, you know. And I said to my guys, oh God, do I really have to go to this lunch? Really, I can't be bothered. Honestly, this thing is just a train wreck. And they said, yep, you've got to go. You must go. And I went, okay. So I go along, I walk in this room, and by now it's about 1:15, and I'm the only person in there. I mean, there were a couple of other people in the corner, like, no great note. And I went, okay, and they took me over the seat, and they made me sit down in the seat. So I'm there thinking, this is crazy. I was right the first time, there's no one here. And then in the corner of my eye, I looked up, and Robert Mugabe walked in, and he sat next to me. And I thought, shit, I'm not doing this, And there were these guys with cameras, and I thought, this is going to go really well. It's one of my first overseas trips. I'm at this thing that's falling apart, and the only picture is me and Mugabe. And I just said,
Greenpeace are not going to like that.
No, so I just said, please don't take this the wrong way, but I'm running with my instincts. I'm out of here. See ya.
Did
I
you?
just got up and left. Yeah. Oh, no, God, I wasn't going to sit around there. Anyway. That wasn't good. It wasn't good.
Instincts are good things, though.
Instincts are a good thing, yeah. But no, you do meet. Yeah, I mean, you meet lots of people, and you meet remarkable people, like everyday New Zealanders who are remarkable people. Yeah, it's not just. I mean, obviously, people that are world leaders or whatever. Yeah, I mean, that's of its own magnitude. But yeah, you meet people, and they have great stories to tell, and they do incredible things. And I think that's the thing with the honours list. The honours list that they do twice a year. And they do pretty well, I reckon. I reckon governments are pretty good. They don't say, oh, this person votes one way or the other. They're pretty good at actually picking people. You get about 500 recommendations, about 180 people get through. It's a funny system, but it sort of works its way out. But actually, it's interesting. It's not the person necessarily, no disrespect to me and them, that get the knighted or whatever. It's often the little nun or the little person that's done 98 years in the community at Girls Brigade or whatever. That's that they've got the great stories to tell. Really, I think they're quite cool. Yeah. They get a little MNZN or something, or QSM. It's quite sweet.
I used to sort of come home and say to my husband, I think we should move to, in the future. And he'd go, you just sort of say that about everywhere you go to. And I'd go, well, I suppose we're lucky that we used to go and the town would kind of show you the best of what it was, eh? And you would just meet these amazing, remarkable people in the towns and villages of this country that were just,
No, I went to
getting on with it and doing it. And it was a privilege.
Yeah, I went to school, like Ian was talking about the other day. I was in the middle of nowhere, and I went there when I was PM, and I wandered in. This little girl came up to me and she said, oh, Prime Minister, this is the greatest day of my life. And I went, why is that? And she said, because you've come to our school. And I said, oh, thank you very much, that's very sweet of you. And she said, yeah, you should see, they cleaned the pool and they painted everything. It's awesome. She wasn't actually that stoked to see me, but she was really stoked with what happened.
And lunch is going to be really good today.
No, it was just like, it's an amazing thing, it's all good.
Cool. And so I suppose I just sort of finish on, kind of what's next, do you reckon? Next for you, and what do you reckon the next sort of 2 to 3 years look like? And I know that that's a big question to finish on. Yeah. But at both, I suppose, a personal and a kind of for New Zealand, and when we, no one can predict when the borders really do open properly, but we're watching Australia bump again today.
Yeah. Look, I think the simple bottom line is that, we had the capacity to lock down in New Zealand that other countries really didn't have, other than Australia, really. So, okay, the UK is an island, I understand that, but it's just not that simple when you are so connected within Europe and all the things you do. The United States could be 50 individual countries. Yeah, Maui and Hawaii locked down a little bit more and were more akin to New Zealand, but fundamentally most of those places were integrated and they really couldn't do much. So, really, lockdown and what we did, essentially, hermetically seal the country, was the right thing to do in the absence of a vaccine. But now, actually, you've got a vaccine. I would argue with the vaccine rollout, it's terribly slow, and we've got to get on with it. I mean, people got to be able to travel, and people got to be able to do things. Here's your problem. Whatever you think, 20% of people aren't going to take it. I'm amazed. We might be a little better in New Zealand. The stats don't seem to indicate that, but we might be a little bit better. So when you look at the research of why people won't take it, here's the reasons why. They basically say, I don't trust it. So that's the main reason. They say, it's happened too fast, and I don't trust it, right? And so I say, well, okay, Here are the reasons why you should trust it. One, firstly, there's been enormous collaboration around the world, right? So people have just worked together. Secondly, normally they find it really hard to get a sample audience to actually take any trial vaccine. So, in fact, I heard on the radio the other day they were advertising for something. If you have this condition, call us, because it was a global thing, right? And whereas COVID-19, gazillions of people rolling up their sleeve wanting to try it. The third thing was the vaccine is not actually new, despite what they tell you. It actually came from the M1H1 strain of Asian bird flu or whatever. That was the starting point, and it's obviously been morphed over, but essentially it isn't quite like they started at base zero. The fourth thing is there's no evidence to support that it's going to do anything. So I was even having this discussion with Max the other day. It was like, oh, well, it could kill you. Well, no, there isn't actually really any evidence it will kill you. It might give you a headache and a sore arm, but yes, varying people have varying degrees of reaction. But essentially, what will kill you is potentially COVID-19.
Yeah.
So it's like anything in life.
Or
It's
kill
like,
your parents.
Yeah,
or...
it's like measles, mumps and rubella. How many parents don't give their kids MMR? And most people do. And the truth is that vaccine has killed the odd child around the world. But actually, the alternative, if you catch it, as some I found out, is it's devastating. So I think, and here's
young people are a problem though. I just want to touch on that because we were astounded the other. I mean, because my husband's a huge vaccinate everyone. If you don't vaccinate, frickin' stay home, and they shouldn't be allowed out. And we're sitting there with this 20-year-old. and she just went, "I'm not sure I'll vaccinate," and just
lots
like
of them.
the room, we were just so shocked because we're so pro. And of course, it's social media. So you just touched on Max and that misinformation.
Yeah, the misinformation campaign is amazing.
That some of our young people are getting is terrifying.
Yeah, no, it's amazing.
So she's kicked out of home, by the way, and she's living on the. No, she's not.
Here's going to be the challenge, though, right? Which I don't think actually entirely the government sorts through, if I'm really honest, is that we've got this bubble with Australia. Okay, on hold a little bit in New South Wales and things at the moment, but essentially we've got a bubble, and the bubble will carry on, right? Australia's just come out a wee while ago, a few weeks ago. Scott Morrison got out of quarantine from being overseas, and he said, here's my 4-point plan for effectively opening up Australia. But in essence, it is vaccinate everyone as fast as I can and open up the borders, and a bit like the UK and the US, and in the end, we've got to learn to live with COVID. So the reason why they think that, if you go on to Google, and you go UK COVID cases, most people probably have, you'll see the graph, it massively spikes at 66,000 cases in the middle of December, and then it goes all the way down to about 1,500, and it's currently running at about 35,000 a day, right? So that, on the one hand, the cases look really bad. Overlay on that, the hospitalisation and death rate of COVID now, and it's really low, right? So what's happening is not that many people are going to hospital, and not as many people are dying, which is not to minimise it in any way. I'm just saying that's what's driving them to say, if you get vaccinated, the viral load you'll get will be quite low. Now you might be really unwell, but you generally going to be better. So they're just saying, okay, we don't close down a country for all sorts of things that could kill you. I mean, like in Europe. Like I think in Italy, 10,000 people a year die of the flu anyway. In New Zealand, hundreds of people a year die of the flu under normal circumstances. We don't make you stay home for that. We say, look, do your best to take a flu jab and protect yourself and wash your hands and don't go out if you're feeling unwell. But in essence, we live with it. So here's the challenge. If Australia's going to open up and you accept that 20% of Australians at least aren't going to be vaccinated, then you're going to get to a point where you're going to say, if we have a bubble with Australia, they're going to come into New Zealand and they're not going to be quarantining, and COVID will be in New Zealand, even if we didn't want to open up. And by the way, we can't stay unopen forever. So we're going to have to get to the point where we're going to have to say, look, really, if you're thinking smart, you'll be vaccinated. It doesn't mean you can't catch it, but you're far less likely to die of it and far less likely to have very significant symptoms.
And pass it on.
And pass it on. Yeah. So I think it's going to be something where we just got to get on the rollout. We're going to have annual shots. You can see Israel already having the third booster shot. And we just got to get on with it as quick as we can. Because lockdown was the right thing in the absence of a vaccine, but now we have a vaccine, we've got to have it. I think it'll take years, actually, for things to come right. I don't think it'll be as simple as them opening up and saying it's a free-for-all Christmas. I think they'll say there's green, orange and red countries. I think they'll probably trial stuff like you have saliva tests, you've got to have a pre-COVID test before you get on the plane. Probably got to self-isolate at home if you're double vaccinated for 5 days. That's what they do in the UK. In Germany at the moment, they do all these sort of tests on, before you get on the plane. I mean, you can do all this stuff. Anyway, all that's coming. It's all technology and it's all coming. So I think that's where it goes. But I think it takes quite a few years for things to come back and a while for people. There'll be a massive pent-up demand for tourism, but it will take a while, I think, for people to really, get
Feel
there.
that confident.
Yeah. So that's sort of it. And yeah, for me, it's sort of just, more of the same. I mean, just to
Big
finish
60 coming up
Big
this
60,
year,
yep,
though.
60. Look, I don't know. I'm in a great. I'm in a great space in my life. I kind of enjoy what I'm doing. I'm lucky enough to have a fantastic family. I've had a great life in what I've done. I hope I live to 100, and at that stage, I'm still playing golf and doing things I like doing. I'm never going to die wondering, and I'm not going to die unhappy. Because I think there's a big club of former prime ministers. Almost all of them are miserable. They hate the public because they voted them out. They hate the party because they voted them out. They just hate, they hate lots of stuff. And hate is a big word. Whereas I'm in that real small camp of happy ex-prime ministers. I had a great time when I was there. I really enjoyed it. I actually like people. I like the public. I think the test of a good prime minister is whether you left the country in better shape than you found it. It's a totally subjective test. The people that don't like me will never think I did a good job, and the people that do like me will think I did. But in the end, I can't change any of that now. And so I'm just going to go and have a nice balanced life, hopefully, and not fall out of the sky in a helicopter. That's the big aim of the next 40 years. But yeah, and I'm massively optimistic about New Zealand. I think that technology, I just sort of see it in the stuff I do in Silicon Valley. Technology is just changing the world and changing the way we operate. And 20 years ago, you wouldn't have had what Ian's got in Dunedin. I've been to Ian's place on numerous occasions when I was PM, and it's remarkable. And there's just so many examples of that we can do. And I think that's the only thing we've got to do is we just sort of got to lift our horizons a little bit and just say we're going to, we expect the All Blacks to play every single week and win. But we don't always expect our companies to do that. And I think we've just got to be a little bit more
optimistic.
Yeah, and back them sort of get there, I think. So yeah, that's
on that. Let's give a big round of applause to
Oh, great.
We're back in It's Balsamic.
Oh, balsamic.
On that, I'm just showing them it's a local balsamic because we're backing a little business, as you should, locally. And I've got one for you that I forgot to give to you as well.
It's quite funny because it's got divinity on it, and I thought it had destiny on it. I was thinking, man, I didn't realise this was a Destiny Church meeting. Brian Tummock would be very happy.
Jesus made balsamic vinegar,
as a
teenager.
Yeah, we're going to have to work on that.
Can I just say thank you so much, and thank you for interacting the way that you have, and I think for a lovely informal, and I think everyone here I can see are all mesmerised, and there's people standing at the back, which is kind of cool. We're privileged to have had you as our Prime Minister and privileged to have had you here today, so thank you so much.
Thank you.